Welcome back to another episode of The Deep Dig. We're in Matthew 5:13, the Sermon on the Mount. It says, "You are like salt and light." 13 says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its salty taste, it cannot be made salty again. It is good for nothing except to be thrown out and walked on." And I just wondered why Jesus referred to his believers as salt of the earth, because salt doesn't really have the best reputation these days. It's related to high blood pressure, and if you call someone salty, it's not really a good thing. So I wanted to dig a little deeper on this, and I found out some cool facts. So I'm sure you're thinking the obvious, that salt enhances flavor, and thus when Jesus said that, he was telling us to go out and do good deeds and make the world a better place. But it actually gets a lot deeper than that, and what he means a lot more than that. In the first century, salt was a symbol of friendship and good health. The root word for salt is sal, which is still the word in Spanish. The Romans knew that salt had antiseptic properties, and their goddess of health's name was Salus. This is her here. The Latin word salubrious means health, and its synonyms are healthful and wholesome. Wholesome is something that builds you up, sustains physical, mental, and spiritually. So when Jesus called us the salt of the earth, he meant for us to be wholesome and to go out to lift people up, to help them physically, mentally, and spiritually. Regarding friendship, salt was a symbol of friendship. In the first century, if you went to a friend's house for dinner, salt would be left on the table as a symbol that your friendship was still good. And in England, the guests that sat closest to the salt cellar were the closest friends to the host. In Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting at the Final Supper with Jesus and the disciples, you can see a spilt salt cellar in front of Judas, symbolizing a broken friendship or lack of friendship. So when Jesus told us that we are the salt of the earth, I think he was saying that we need to be friendly and make friendships, and that is how we can spread the good news to people also. Salt is very valuable. Here we see a salt brick that was used for bartering, basically currency, in places like Ethiopia. And the Latin term salarium argentum basically means salt as your pay. In Rome, some of the Roman soldiers were paid partially with money and partially with salt. And actually the English word salary comes from this term, salarium argentum. Argentum is silver, and that is where the periodic table element name Ag for silver, that comes from argentum also, Ag. If you've heard the term not worth his salt, that is actually where that term came from, was the Roman pay, salarium argentum. So when Jesus said that we are salt of the earth, he is saying that we are valuable, we hold value, valuable to him and to the cause, to bring more people to know Jesus. The second part of this verse says, "But if the salt loses its salty taste, it cannot be made salty again." And I think this is talking about the believer that turns away from God and is living in the world again. But it did spark an interest in me to see if salt could lose its taste. I found a lot of articles stating that salt could not lose its flavor, and I read this on Wikipedia, which is not a good reference anyway, but still. It says, France notes that Jesus was given a lesson in moral philosophy and not teaching chemistry. To him, whether or not the proverbial image is factually accurate is of little relevance to the actual message of the verse. And I don't really agree with this because I feel like every word in the Bible is meant to be in there, and there's nothing in the Bible that's just put in there that isn't true. And with a little more research, I did find an article by a Turkish salt company that explained salt could lose its saltiness and how it loses its saltiness, and the reason why enhanced this Bible verse and what Jesus was saying even more, so it was relevant to the message of this verse. Koyunca Salt Company in Turkey says salt might lose its flavor under certain conditions when it contains chemical impurities, and that's their contact information. I thought this was very interesting because impurities could mean sin. And in that Bible verse, Jesus saying, we're the salt of the earth, but if we lose that saltiness, we aren't good for anything except to be thrown out and walked on. Which to me sounds like you're turning away from God. You're turning to the world. You're turning to sin. And you're good for nothing. Or at least you're not good for the cause anymore. If you look at the Dead Sea, which has a lot of salt in it, it purifies. There's nothing else can live in the Dead Sea, and so when we are the salt, we are purified under Jesus, who died for our sins. If we lose our saltiness, we have imperfections, we have sin, or we're living in sin, or we're living in a worldly way, and thus we're not useful to the cause anymore. So I think that wraps it up for this episode of The Deep Dig. I'm so glad that I went down this rabbit hole researching salt, because that verse to me, it means much more to me now. And I'm almost honored that Jesus said that to his believers, to me, to anyone who believes in Jesus. I hope you learned something. I hope you found it interesting, and if you could like and subscribe.